Oberleutnant Klaus Reinhardt crouches behind his Panzer IV, hands shaking as he watches the T-34 emerge from the tree line 400 meters away. His crew is already inside, engine running, but Reinhardt stays outside for 3 more seconds. He's counting the dried mud caked across the Soviet tank's hull. It's everywhere, thick as winter bread, covering the glacis plate, the turret sides, even parts of the gun mantlet. The T-34 looks like it crawled out of a riverbed and kept going. Reinhardt drops into his commander's hatch and gives the order. His gunner fires. The round strikes center mass on the T-34's front slope. There's the familiar crack of impact, but the Soviet tank keeps rolling. No penetration, no catastrophic hit, just a spray of dried earth and a dimple in the armor beneath. What Reinhardt doesn't know is that the mud he's seeing isn't accident, it's doctrine. And in the next 18 months, this crude trick will force German anti-tank crews to recalculate everything they thought they understood about penetration physics. The Soviets have discovered something Wehrmacht engineers won't believe until they capture the field manuals, and by then, it will have saved hundreds of tanks that should have died. Let's step back. Spring 1943. The Eastern Front is a meat grinder running in both directions. Germany has just retaken Kharkov after weeks of brutal urban combat. Soviet forces are regrouping after catastrophic losses at Stalingrad. Both armies are bleeding armor faster than factories can replace it. The mathematics are horrifying. Soviet tank production reaches 2,000 units per month by mid-1943. They're still losing them faster than that. Here's the problem the Red Army faces. German anti-tank doctrine is devastatingly effective. The Pa-40 75mm gun can punch through 60mm of armor at 1,000 meters. The newer 88mm guns are even worse. They penetrate 100mm at the same range. Soviet T-34s have 45mm of frontal armor on early models, 60mm on the later 1943 variants, all sloped at 60 degrees from vertical. The math says they should survive at medium range. The battlefield says otherwise. Between January and May 1943, the Red Army loses over 6,000 tanks. Not all to direct fire, not all to German guns, but enough. Breakdowns account for 30%. Abandoned vehicles after breakthrough maneuvers add another 20%. Tactical withdrawals where crews scuttle their own armor to avoid capture. But when Soviet tanks do die in direct combat, they die to penetration. A round punches through the armor, ignites ammunition stored in the hull, cooks the crew alive. Standard operating casualty. Soviet armor doctrine says the T-34's sloped armor and mobility are its advantages. The glacis plate sits at 60 degrees. Physics works in your favor, rounds deflect, effective thickness increases, keep moving, use speed, don't present a static target, don't get hit in the first place. It works in theory. The problem is spring. The Rasputitsa arrives like clockwork every March and April. The spring thaw turns the entire Ukrainian steppe into an ocean of liquid mud. Tank columns can't maneuver off designated routes. Speed becomes impossible. Roads transform into traps where vehicles bog down to their drive sprockets. The entire advantage of Soviet armor design evaporates, and German anti-tank guns are waiting at every crossroad. Tank crews start noticing something strange during the March thaw. When their vehicles ford rivers or push through marshland, mud accumulates on the hull in thick layers. The T-34's diesel engine runs hot. The armor radiates heat even in freezing weather. Wet mud coating the hull doesn't stay wet for long. It bakes, hardens into a cement-like shell, and when these mud-caked tanks take hits, something unexpected happens. Not every time, not with direct penetrations at close range, but shells that should crack welds or cause interior spalling seem to lose energy. Glancing hits that should cave in hatches or damage optics bounce off in showers of dried earth. The mud absorbs impact, not much, maybe 10% of the kinetic energy, maybe 15%, but in tank combat, 15% is the difference between penetration and survival. A junior lieutenant named Dmitry Lavrinenko commands a T-34 in the 5th Guards Tank Brigade. His tank takes a hit from a POK-38 50mm gun during a skirmish near Belgorod. The round strikes the turret side at an oblique angle. His crew braces for the flash of penetration. Nothing happens. The shell gouges through 2 inches of dried mud and scars the armor beneath but doesn't punch through. Lavrinenko's loader checks the interior wall. No spalling, no cracks, just the ringing impact that leaves everyone's ears bleeding. Lavrinenko reports the incident to his battalion commander. The story spreads. Other crews share similar experiences. A tank that forded the Donets River and got coated in river silt takes 3 hits before a 4th finally penetrates. A vehicle that drove through a plowed field during a rainstorm accumulates so much mud it gains an extra 400 kilograms of weight, but it survives a flank shot that should have killed it. This is where Soviet pragmatism meets desperation. The Red Army doesn't have time for extended research programs. They don't have the luxury of laboratory testing and peer-reviewed studies. What they have are field reports from crews who should be dead but aren't, and a leadership structure willing to try anything that might reduce casualties. Senior Lieutenant Viktor Kravchenko serves as a technical officer in the 3rd Mechanized Corps. He collects reports about the mud phenomenon through April 1943. Kravchenko is a university-trained engineer who worked in a tractor factory before the war. He understands material science. He also understands that desperation makes people see patterns that aren't there. So he does something unusual. He tests it. Kravchenko arranges an informal trial at a tank depot outside Kursk. He takes 2 damaged T-34s pulled from the front line. Both have identical armor damage. Turret hits, that penetrated, but didn't destroy the vehicles. One tank gets hosed down until it's clean. The other stays caked in the dried mud it accumulated during combat. Kravchenko's team fires captured German 50mm rounds at both tanks from 300 meters. Oblique angles only, not direct penetrations. The clean tank takes 8 hits. 6 penetrate or cause serious spalling. The mud-caked tank takes 8 hits at the same angles. 3 penetrate. 5 are stopped or deflected by the combination of mud layer and underlying armor. The difference is statistically significant. It's also completely against doctrine. Tank armor theory says you want homogeneous steel plate at specific hardness levels. You want consistent thickness. You want modern metallurgy and proper sloping. You don't want random layers of baked earth. Every armor textbook says additional weight without structural integrity is pointless. The mud adds mass, but no real protection. It should crumble on impact and provide 0 defensive value. Except it doesn't crumble. Not when it's properly dried. Ukrainian steppe mud contains high clay content. When it bakes onto hot tank armor, it forms something closer to ceramic than dirt. Not as hard as steel, not even close, but hard enough to disrupt the physics of penetration in unexpected ways. When an anti-tank round hits steel armor, it tries to punch through via kinetic energy transfer. The shell's hardened penetrator concentrates force on a small area. If the armor is harder than the penetrator, the shell shatters. If the penetrator is harder, it pushes through. Simple material physics. But add a 3-inch layer of hardened mud and the equation changes. The mud layer absorbs the initial impact. It's not strong enough to stop the round, but it's thick enough to deform the shell's trajectory by fractions of a degree. At oblique angles, fractions matter. A round that would hit armor at 58 degrees instead hits at 61 degrees. That's enough to transform a penetration into a deflection. The mud also creates a standoff layer. The shell wastes energy pulverizing dried earth before it even touches steel. Kravchenko writes a report. He sends it up the chain of command to the technical department of the 3rd Mechanized Corps. The report includes his test results, casualty comparisons, and a recommendation. Tank crews operating in muddy conditions should deliberately coat their vehicles in wet mud before combat operations. Let it dry. Accept the weight penalty. The trade-off is worth it. Senior Sergeant Anatoly Volkov commands a T-34 Model 1942 in a company holding defensive positions south of Panyry. His orders are simple. Dig in the tanks. Use them as mobile pillboxes. Wait for the German offensive everyone knows is coming. The intelligence reports say Wehrmacht forces are massing for a massive pincer attack. Hundreds of tanks, maybe 1,000. The numbers keep growing with every briefing. Volkov's company commander gives his crews a choice. They can coat their tanks in mud if they want. Some crews decline. They don't trust the idea. It sounds like peasant superstition dressed up as tactics. But Volkov remembers something from before the war. He grew up in a village where houses had walls made from mud brick reinforced with straw. Those walls stopped wind, stopped cold, sometimes even stopped rifle rounds if the mud was thick enough and properly cured. He decides to try it. His crew thinks he's crazy, but they follow orders. They spend an afternoon hauling buckets of wet mud from a nearby stream bed. The mud is thick and dark, rich in clay. They spread it across the front glacis plate, the turret face, and the gun mantlet. They build it up in layers. First coat goes on thin. Let it dry for an hour. Second coat goes on thicker. The mud cracks as it dries, but that's acceptable. They keep adding layers until they have coverage between 2 and 4 inches thick across the most vulnerable areas. The additional weight is noticeable. The T-34 sits lower on its suspension. The mud adds roughly 300 kilograms. That's 3 full-grown men worth of dead weight. The tank's acceleration suffers. Top speed drops by about 3 kilometers per hour. But they're in defensive positions. Speed doesn't matter. Survivability does. Other crews in the company watch Volkov's experiment. Some follow his example. Others decide to wait and see results before committing. By early June, about 40% of the tanks in Volkov's brigade have some form of mud coating. It's not uniform. Every crew applies it differently. Some coat only the front glosses. Others cover every surface they can reach. One crew even coats the rear deck until their commander makes them remove it because it's blocking engine ventilation. The Germans attack on July 5, 1943, Operation Citadel, the last great German offensive on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht commits over 2,000 tanks and assault guns to the Kursk offensive, nearly 1 million men. The largest armored battle in human history is about to unfold. Volkov's brigade takes contact on the second day of the offensive. German forces push toward Poniri with infantry supported by Panzer Befors and a handful of the new Panther tanks. The Panthers are terrifying. 75mm high-velocity guns, 80mm of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees. They outclass the T-34 in almost every category. The first engagement happens at 700 meters. German tanks advancing across open ground, Soviet tanks in hull-down positions behind earthworks. Volkov's gunner acquires a Panzer IV, fires, misses. The German tank returns fire. The round hits Volkov's turret at an angle. There's the crack of impact. The entire tank rings like a bell. Volkov's ears go numb. But the shell doesn't penetrate. The mud coating on the turret face disintegrates in a shower of baked earth. The armor beneath shows a deep gouge but no hole. His gunner fires again. This time the round connects. The Panzer IV erupts in flames. Volkov doesn't have time to celebrate. Another German tank is already firing. The engagement lasts 40 minutes. His T-34 takes 5 hits total. 3 are stopped by the combination of mud coating and sloped armor. 2 penetrate, but don't catastrophically damage the vehicle. His crew survives. The tank next to Volkov's doesn't have mud coating. It takes 2 hits. Both penetrate. The crew bails out, but the loader doesn't make it. After the engagement, Volkov counts 7 tanks in his company still operational. 4 had mud coating. 3 didn't. The survival rate isn't perfect. Mud doesn't make you invincible, but the numbers suggest it helps. Word spreads through the brigade, then through the division. Crews that rejected the idea start asking how to apply it properly. Volkov's method becomes informal doctrine. Use clay-rich mud. Apply in layers. Let each layer dry before adding the next. Focus on the glacis plate and turret face. Don't block vision ports or ventilation. Accept the weight penalty. Soviet commanders start noticing the trend. Tank battalions with high percentages of mud-coated vehicles show marginally better survival rates. Not dramatic differences. Maybe 10 to 15% fewer total losses. But in a battle where the Red Army is losing dozens of tanks per day, 15% matters. That's 3 tanks per battalion that survive to fight tomorrow instead of burning today. The problem is that mud coating isn't permanent. Combat damage destroys it. Heavy rain washes it away. Even normal movement causes chunks to fall off. Crews have to reapply after every engagement. That means time, labor, access to suitable mud. In the chaos of the Kursk battle, maintaining mud armor becomes another task competing for crew attention, alongside ammunition loading, refueling, and maintenance. Some crews give up. It's too much work for uncertain benefits. Others become obsessive about it. They develop techniques for faster application. They identify the best mud sources near their positions. Some even mix the mud with straw or grass to increase cohesion, creating something closer to primitive concrete. Junior Lieutenant Pyotr Skripkin commands a tank company in the 10th Tank Corps. He's a former collective farm manager who understands dirt better than most officers. Skripkin notices that mud from different locations performs differently. River mud is too fine. It dries without hardness. Mud from plowed fields contains too much organic material. It doesn't bond properly to metal. But mud from ancient stream beds, the kind with high clay and mineral content, dries into a ceramic-like substance. Skripkin starts mapping mud sources. He literally draws maps showing his crews where to find the best material for coating. Other officers think he's insane. One major asks if Skripkin plans to open a pottery shop after the war. But Skripkin's company has the lowest casualty rate in the battalion. 11 tanks at the start of Kursk, 9 still operational 2 weeks later. The division average is losing 50% in the same period. His success catches attention at brigade level. A political officer visits to investigate. The Soviet military in 1943 is paranoid about deviations from doctrine. Unofficial tactics can be seen as undermining authority, but the political officer reviews the casualty figures, talks to crews, sees the results. He doesn't punish Skripkin. Instead, he recommends the tactic for wider adoption. That's when things get complicated. The Red Army's central command structure hears about mud armor through multiple channels: field reports, political officer observations, intelligence summaries. By August 1943, enough data has accumulated that senior leadership has to make a decision: officially endorse the practice, ban it as unmilitary, or maintain the informal status quo. The decision lands on the desk of Marshal Georgy Zhukov. He's overseeing the entire Kursk operation. He's also the man who pioneered deep battle doctrine and combined arms theory in the Red Army. Zhukov understands innovation. He also understands that battlefield improvisations can't replace proper engineering. Zhukov orders a formal evaluation. The Red Army's Tank Technical Directorate conducts tests at a proving ground outside Moscow. They use captured German anti-tank guns, fire at T-34s with and without mud coating, measure penetration rates, document results. The tests run for 3 weeks in September 1943. The results confirm what field crews already know. Mud coating provides marginal protection against oblique hits at medium range. Effectiveness depends on mud quality, layer thickness, and drying time. Against direct hits at close range, mud provides almost no benefit. Against high-velocity 88mm guns, the protection is negligible. But against the standard POC 40-75mm gun at ranges beyond 400 meters, mud coating reduces penetration probability by approximately 12 to 18%. 12 to 18%. That's the number that matters. Not a miracle, not invulnerability, just a small edge that shifts survival odds in the crew's favor. In a war where the Soviet Union is trading 3 tanks for every one destroyed, an 18% improvement in survival rate is strategically significant. But there's a cost. The tests also document the downsides: reduced mobility, increased fuel consumption due to added weight, maintenance complications when mud gets into track assemblies, visual identification problems when mud obscures recognition markings, and the simple fact that applying mud coating requires time and labor that could be spent on other preparations. The Technical Directorate writes a report. The conclusion is carefully worded. Mud coating is not recommended as standard doctrine. It should not replace proper armor or tactical positioning. But in situations where crews have access to suitable materials and time to apply coating, it may provide supplemental protection worth the trade-offs. Local commanders are authorized to permit the practice at their discretion. That's the Soviet way. No grand pronouncements, no formal addition to the tank manual. Just permission for crews to make their own choices based on local conditions. The Red Army trusts its soldiers to figure out what works. Top-down innovation is too slow. Bottom-up experimentation wins wars. By autumn 1943, mud armor has become standard practice in many Soviet tank units. Not all, not even most, but enough that German intelligence starts noticing. Captured Soviet documents mention the technique. Interrogated prisoners describe coating their tanks in mud. Wehrmacht officers initially dismiss it as desperate improvisation by poorly equipped peasant soldiers. Then German tank crews start reporting the same phenomenon. Rounds that should penetrate T-34s are being defeated. The Soviets appear to have upgraded their armor somehow. Intelligence analysts investigate. They eventually figure out what's happening. The reaction among German officers ranges from dismissive to grudgingly impressed. The Red Army is pushing west. The great Soviet counteroffensive that began after Kursk is rolling through Ukraine. German forces are retreating toward prepared defensive lines along the Dnieper River. Tank warfare shifts from massive pitched battles to river crossings, urban fighting, and pursuit operations. The nature of combat changes. So does the application of mud armor. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Kosarotov commands a forward reconnaissance company in the 1st Guards Tank Army. His job is to identify crossing points, probe German defenses, and secure bridgeheads for follow-on forces. Reconnaissance tanks can't afford heavy mud coating. Weight penalties matter when you need speed and maneuverability, but Kosarotov's crews still use the technique selectively. They coat only the front glacis and turret face, thin layers, maybe 1 inch thick instead of 3 or 4. The protection is minimal, but it's enough to potentially stop light anti-tank weapons. German infantry are increasingly equipped with Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck rockets. These shape-charge weapons can destroy any tank regardless of armor thickness, but they have to hit clean armor to function properly. Mud coating sometimes disrupts the shape-charge jet just enough to prevent catastrophic penetration. Kosarotov's company conducts 37 river crossing operations between October and December 1943. They lose 14 tanks, 8 to German artillery, 3 to mines, 2 to Panzerfaust hits that penetrate despite mud coating, 1 to mechanical failure in mid-river. But they also survive 11 close-range Panzerfaust attacks where the warhead detonates against mud coating and fails to fully penetrate the underlying armor. Those 11 survivals matter. Each represents a crew that lives to fight again, a tank that stays operational, a reconnaissance mission that succeeds instead of fails. The cumulative effect across an entire army is thousands of additional tank days of operational capability. That translates to territory captured, enemy forces destroyed, and strategic objectives achieved. But mud armor isn't spreading through the Red Army because of strategic calculations. It's spreading because crews talk to each other. A loader who survived because of mud coating tells his cousin in another unit. That cousin tells his company. Methods spread laterally through informal networks faster than any official directive could achieve. The techniques evolve. Crews discover that adding salt to mud helps it dry harder. A tanker who worked in a brick factory before the war explains that minerals strengthen dried clay. Some units start mixing wood ash into their mud coating. The ash contains lime, which acts as a primitive binding agent. The resulting coating is harder and more durable than plain mud. Other crews experiment with application patterns. Instead of uniform coating, they create textured surfaces with ridges and grooves. The theory is that irregular surfaces deflect rounds more effectively than smooth ones. Whether this actually works is unclear. The physics are complicated, but tankers are practical people. If something seems to help and doesn't obviously hurt, they keep doing it. By early 1944, the practice has spread beyond tank units. Soviet assault gun crews start coating their Su-85s and Su-100s. These turretless tank destroyers have more surface area to protect. Some crews coat the entire superstructure. The weight penalty is severe, but the vehicles are already slow. In defensive positions, mobility matters less than survivability. Self-propelled artillery crews even try coating their vehicles. The Su-76 has minimal armor, just 10 to 25 millimeters in most places. Mud coating doubles or triples effective thickness against small arms and shell fragments. It won't stop anti-tank rounds, but it provides some protection against indirect fire and shrapnel. In the chaos of combined arms warfare, that's valuable. The Germans notice the trend. Wehrmacht intelligence reports from early 1944 document widespread Soviet use of mud coating on armored vehicles. Some reports are contemptuous, describing it as evidence of Soviet industrial inadequacy. Others are more analytical, noting that the practice reflects tactical adaptability and pragmatic problem solving. A captured Soviet tank manual from 1944 includes a section on field expedient armor enhancement. The section is only 3 paragraphs long. It doesn't provide detailed instructions, but it acknowledges that crews may apply mud, logs, sandbags, or spare track links to increase protection. The manual notes that such measures are temporary and should not replace proper tactical positioning or movement discipline. That's as close as the Red Army gets to officially endorsing mud armor. A 3-paragraph acknowledgement in a field manual. No technical specifications, no standardized procedures, just recognition that the practice exists and permission to continue. The Soviet military understands that trying to standardize every battlefield innovation would strangle the creativity that makes those innovations possible. German forces develop counter-tactics. Anti-tank crews are trained to recognize mud-coated Soviet vehicles and adjust their aim accordingly. Some crews carry extra high-explosive rounds specifically to blast off mud before engaging with armor-piercing shells. Others target specific vulnerable points like gun barrels, optics, or track assemblies where mud coating doesn't help. But the counter-tactics have limited effectiveness. Removing mud coating requires time and ammunition. In fast-moving engagements, there's no opportunity for methodical target preparation. German tank commanders have to make split-second decisions, aim for the visible target, or waste time trying to clean it first. Most choose to fire immediately. That gives mud-coated Soviet tanks their edge. The survival statistics tell the story. Soviet tank units with high mud armor adoption rates show approximately 13% lower total loss rates compared to units without the practice. That's averaged across all causes of loss, not just combat penetrations. 13% doesn't sound like much, but applied across the thousands of tanks in active service, it means hundreds of additional vehicles surviving each month. Those hundreds of survivors accumulate into strategic advantage. A tank that survives today can attack tomorrow. A crew that lives through one engagement brings experience to the next. Over months of sustained operations, the cumulative effect becomes significant. The Red Army's numerical advantage over German forces grows slightly larger. The replacement rate drops slightly lower. Margins shift incrementally towards Soviet victory. But mud armor has costs beyond weight and mobility. Maintenance becomes more complicated. Dried mud infiltrates track assemblies and suspension systems. It clogs air filters and ventilation systems. Tank crews have to spend extra time cleaning their vehicles between operations. Mechanics complain that mud coating creates additional work when they're already overwhelmed. Some crews abandon the practice during periods of intensive operations. When you're fighting 3 engagements per day and moving 30 kilometers between battles, there's no time to carefully apply and cure mud layers. The tactic works best in semi-static defensive operations or during operational pauses when crews have hours to prepare. Winter creates new complications. Frozen mud is harder than summer-dried mud, but also more brittle. It cracks and falls off during movement. Some crews try mixing snow with mud to create a slurry that freezes into a hard coating. The results are mixed. Frozen mud-snow mixtures sometimes provide even better protection than dried mud. Other times they shatter on first impact and provide no benefit. Struggling with broken-down vehicles and shortage of spare parts can't always invest time in optional protective measures. The Red Army is hammering toward Berlin. Soviet forces have liberated most of Eastern Europe and are pushing into German territory. The Wehrmacht is collapsing but still fighting hard. Every kilometer costs blood and metal. Tank battles continue even as the strategic outcome becomes inevitable. Guards Captain Mikhail Baranov commands a T-34 U-85 company in the 2nd Guards Tank Army. His unit is part of the massive offensive driving from the Vistula River toward the Oder. The pace is relentless, sometimes 30 kilometers per day. Tank crews sleep in their vehicles. Maintenance happens on the move. There's barely time to refuel and rearm between engagements. Baranov's crews don't use mud armor during the initial assault. There's no time. The offensive depends on speed and momentum. Every hour matters. But when Soviet forces reach fortified German positions along the Oder in early February, the operation shifts to siege warfare. Suddenly there's time again. Time to dig in, time to prepare, time to coat tanks in mud. The German defenders have concentrated their remaining armor around key crossing points. Tiger IIs, Panthers, and Panzer IVs arranged in defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. The Red Army's standard tactic is to suppress German positions with artillery and then overwhelm them with mass tank attacks. It works, but the casualty rate is brutal. Baranov's company spends 3 days preparing for an assault on a fortified village. His crews coat their tanks in mud harvested from the Oder riverbank. The mud is thick and clay-rich, perfect for armor coating. They build up layers 4 inches thick on the glacis plates and turret faces. Some crews also coat the side armor, even though it adds significant weight. The assault happens on February 8th. Baranov's company attacks with 11 tanks. They advance across frozen fields under heavy fire. German anti-tank guns engage from concealed positions. The first T-34 takes a hit at 600 meters. The round punches through the glacis despite mud coating. The tank brews up, but the other 10 tanks keep advancing. Baranov's own tank takes 3 hits during the approach. All 3 strike the heavily mud-coated glacis plate at oblique angles. The first hit blows away a chunk of mud coating but doesn't penetrate. The second hit cracks the armor beneath but still doesn't fully penetrate. The third hit finally punches through, but the crew survives because the round's energy is depleted. It tumbles through the interior without detonating ammunition. 7 of the 11 tanks reach the German positions. That's a 64% survival rate. Baranov's battalion commander later notes that previous assaults against similar defenses resulted in 40 to 50% survival rates. The difference might be mud armor, might be luck, might be inferior German ammunition quality this late in the war. Probably a combination. After the battle, Baranov's crew examines their tank. The glacis plate has a hole in it, but the tank is still mobile. The engine runs. The gun works. They patch the hole with welded plate from a destroyed vehicle and return to service within 8 hours. Without mud coating, the first or second hit might have destroyed the tank completely. Instead, it survives to fight through the rest of the campaign. Stories like Baranov's multiply across the front. Not every crew uses mud armor. Not every crew that does survives, but enough crews survive often enough that the practice continues right up to the fall of Berlin. Soviet tanks rolling through German streets in April 1945 still carry dried mud on their hulls. Photographs from the period show T-34s parked in front of the Reichstag with visible mud coating on their glacis plates. After the war, Soviet military analysts review the practice. They study casualty statistics, interview crews, examine damaged vehicles. The conclusion is nuanced. Mud armor provided marginal protection under specific conditions. It was most effective against medium-caliber anti-tank guns at oblique angles beyond 400 meters. It was least effective against close-range shaped charges or high-velocity 88mm guns. The final assessment, mud armor improved survival rates by approximately 10 to 15% in situations where it was applicable. That translates to roughly 800 to 1,000 tanks that survived engagements they might otherwise have lost. Spread across 4 years of war, that's a significant number. Not war-winning, but meaningful. Post-war Soviet tank design doesn't incorporate mud armor. The T-54 and later models rely on proper sloped armor and modern metallurgy, but the experience influences Soviet thinking about field-expedient protection. Later tanks include mounting points for reactive armor and applique plates. The idea that crews should be able to enhance their vehicle's protection using available materials becomes part of Soviet armor doctrine. Western intelligence learns about Soviet mud armor practices through captured documents and post-war interviews. The initial reaction is skeptical. American and British armor officers find it hard to believe that mud could provide meaningful protection. Some dismiss it as Soviet propaganda or battlefield mythology. But testing in the 1950s confirms the basic physics. Non-metallic coatings on armor can disrupt penetration mechanics under specific conditions. The effect is small and unreliable, but measurable. Modern reactive armor and composite armor both exploit similar principles, using layered materials to defeat penetrators. The Soviets stumbled onto a crude version of these concepts through battlefield necessity. The men who used mud armor rarely talked about it after the war. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't high-tech, it was just a practical measure that sometimes saved lives. Veterans like Baranov and Volkov mentioned it in interviews years later, usually as a footnote to larger stories about tank combat. The tactic never became legendary like Kursk or the Berlin Assault, but it represented something important about the Eastern Front. The war in the East was won through aggregate small advantages, compounded over millions of engagements. Mud armor was one of thousands of field improvisations Soviet forces used to shift the odds incrementally in their favor. No single innovation won the war. The accumulation of many small innovations did. The lesson extends beyond World War II. Modern militaries study the mud armor phenomenon as an example of bottom-up innovation under pressure. When formal systems can't provide solutions fast enough, soldiers improvise. Good militaries recognize and support that improvisation. Bad militaries suppress it. The Red Army in 1943 was brutal, wasteful, and often incompetent, but it was also remarkably adaptive. It allowed crews to experiment. It tolerated deviation from doctrine. It promoted ideas that worked regardless of how crude they seemed. That adaptability helped the Soviet Union survive when more rigid military organizations might have collapsed.